Hi, I'm coming back to you with another great reading from the book The Art of Being and Becoming by Hazrat Inayat Khan. But first, let's listen to some seashells. Alright, let's get into today's reading. Let's see, where should I pick up? We're going to continue with the chapter on character building. The whole tragedy of life is in losing sight of one's natural self, and the greatest gain in life is coming into touch with one's real self. The real self is covered by many covers of ego. Those that predominate above all others are hunger and passion. Beneath these are pride and vanity. One must learn to discriminate between what is natural and what is unnatural, what is necessary and what is unnecessary, what brings happiness and what brings sorrow. No doubt it is difficult for many to discriminate between right and wrong, but by standing face to face with one's ego and recognizing it as someone who is ready to make war against one, and by keeping one's strength of will as an unsheathed sword, one protects oneself from one's greatest enemy, which is one's own ego. And a time comes in life when one can say, my worst enemy has been within myself. There are 3 different stages through which the ego develops and reaches the ideal state. The first step is called Amara by the Sufis. And in this, the ego is satisfied by the satisfaction of the passions and the appetites. From this animal stage, the ego may rise to a higher stage, which is man's ego, and that stage is the gratification of vanity. This ego is termed by Sufis lawama, and this stage is the beginning. In the beginning, causes a person to act in every way that is likely to cause harm and to be hurtful and unjust to others. This continues until he learns to understand the true nature of vanity, since all good as well as all evil is born of vanity. When vanity ceases to cause man to do evil, he has reached the human stage. But when vanity causes man to do good, the ego becomes humane, using this word in the Oriental sense in which it means more than human, as it is derived from the 2 words, hu, divine, and manas, mind. The first lesson that the ego must learn in order to develop into the humane state is that of pride in the form of self-respect. A man has the inclination to have good clothes and good ornaments in order to appear in the eyes of others what he considers beautiful. So he must feel the same inclination towards the building of personality by the ornamentation of every action and manner in the way he considers good and beautiful. Chapter 12. Checking the physical ego. The ego is divided into 3 parts: the physical ego, the mental ego, and the spiritual ego. The mental ego is the cover of the spiritual ego, and the physical ego is a cover over the mental one. The ego indeed is one, but these are the 3 different aspects of the ego. The physical ego is nurtured by the gratification of the bodily appetites. One sees that after a meal or some refreshing drink, a feeling of stimulation arises, and no doubt it covers with an additional cover the I within. And therefore there is a difference between sleep and meditation. Although both produce rest, yet one rest is produced by stimulation of the body and the other rest is produced without it. There have been cases of meditative people sleeping only 2 or 3 hours out of the 24 without becoming ill. A person who can sleep well shows the sign of health and yet is subject to any illness. The The gratification of every appetite is a momentary stimulation and rest to the body, but this momentary satisfaction creates a further appetite, and every experience in the satisfaction of the appetite gives a desire for more satisfaction. Thus, the ego, the cover over one's mental and spiritual being, becomes thicker and thicker until it closes all light from within. There are some who eat in order to live, but there are many who live in order to eat. The body is an instrument for the experience by the soul of the external world. But if the whole life be devoted to the instrument, then the person for whom the instrument exists is deprived of his experience in life. The blindness that the physical ego causes can be clearly seen among the lower creatures by the lion's inclination to fight with another lion, the dog's inclination to watch the bone off of which it has already eaten the flesh, which it still does not want another dog to touch. This same physical ego gives man pride in his strength, in his beauty, in his power, in his possessions. If there is a spark of light in time, it must expand into a shining star. And when there is the slightest darkness, that darkness must expand and put the whole life in a mist. In the intoxication of the physical ego, man becomes so interested only in the satisfaction of his appetites that he can readily harm or injure or hurt not only his enemy but his dearest friend. As a drunken man does not know what he says or does, so a person blinded by his physical ego is intoxicated and can easily say or do things regardless of the pleasure, comfort, happiness, harmony, or peace of others. In the satisfaction of bodily appetites, there are two things: necessity and avidity. A satisfaction that is necessary for existence is one thing, and ever-increasing joy in the satisfaction of bodily appetites is another thing. When man acts without regard to this, in either way, in satisfying the appetites or in abstaining from satisfaction, he makes a mistake. In order to train the ego, it is not necessary that cruelty be done to nature. Discrimination is needed to understand how far we should satisfy the appetites and in what degree we should refrain from being addicted to such satisfactions. Intense desire for bodily satisfactions has a bad influence on one's mentality, the psychical action of which works unfavorably on oneself and one's surroundings. It produces jealousy, envy, greed in one's nature, and if the thought currents are strong, it produces psychically poisonous effects. There is a belief in the East that is known by the name of Nazar, a belief that any food or drink can have a poisonous effect upon the one who eats or drinks it if it has been exposed to an evil eye. This superstition is known in almost all parts of the East in some form or other, and the psychical idea behind it is that the intense feeling of envy produces a thought current that must surely spread its poison, causing harm to one against whom the feeling works. In order to train the ego, it is necessary that one should distinguish what is the right of the ego and what is not its right. The ego has a tendency to want what it needs and also what it does not need. The first is its natural appetite, and the second is greed. The ego has a tendency to want more and more of what it likes, regardless of right and justice, and regardless of the after effect. For instance, a person may eat and drink more and more until this makes him ill. Every kind of gratification of desire or appetite gives a tendency to want more. Then there is the desire for a change of experience, and when a person gives into it, it never ends. An excess of desire and appetites or passions always produces an intoxication in man. and it increases to such an extent that the limited means that man has become insufficient to gratify his desires. Therefore, to satisfy his desires, he wants more than what is his own. He wants what belongs to other people. When this begins, naturally, injustice begins. When he cannot get what he wants, then there is pain and disappointment. When a person gratifies his desires more than any other people, the others who see this want to take away the gratification he has. One naturally expects a thinker to understand this and to relieve his ego of all that is unnecessary. The training of the ego is this: to eat to live and not to live to eat. And so with all things one desires, the nature of desire is such that nothing will satisfy it forever. And sometimes the pleasure of a moment costs more than it is worth. When one's eyes are closed to this, one takes the momentary pleasure regardless of what will come after. The training of the ego is not necessarily a sad life of renunciation, nor is it necessarily the life of a hermit. The training is to be wise in life, to understand what we desire, why we desire it, and what effect will follow, what we can afford and what we cannot afford. It is also to understand desire from the point of view of justice, to know whether it is right and just. If the ego is given way to, in the very least in the excess of its desires, it becomes master of oneself. Therefore, in training the ego, even the slightest thing must be avoided that may in time master us. The ideal life is the life of balance, not necessarily the life of renunciation. But renunciation must be practiced if it is necessary for balance. Verily, balance is the real life. When we consider the whole unrest of the present time in the world, we find that it is caused by the physical ego. The wars and revolutions seem to have the desire for comfort and pleasure and for more earthly gain behind them. Since the happiness of the world depends upon the moral standard of the majority, it is upon the education of human nature and the physical law of happiness that the peace of the world depends. Let's go on to chapter 13, called Vanity, the Plant of Desire. The whole of manifestation is the expression of that spirit of the logos which in Sufi terms is called Kibriya. Through every being, this spirit is manifested in the form of vanity, pride, or conceit. Vanity expressed crudely is called pride. Had it not been for this spirit working in every being as the central theme of life, no good or bad would have existed in the world, nor would there have been great or small. All virtues and every ego and every evil are the offspring of this spirit. The art of personality is to cut off the rough edges of this spirit of vanity, which hurts and disturbs those one meets in life. The more a person says I, the more he disturbs the minds of his listeners. Many times people are trained in politeness and are taught a polished language and manner. Yet, if this spirit of vanity is pronounced, it will creep up. In spite of all good manners and beautiful language, and express itself in a person's thought, speech, or action, calling aloud, I am, I am. If a person be speechless, His vanity will leap out in the expression of his glance. It is the hardest thing to suppress and to control. For adepts, the struggle in life is not so great with the passions and emotions, which sooner or later by more or less effort can be controlled, but with vanity, which is always growing. If one cuts down its stem, then one cannot live, for it is the very self. It is the I, the ego, the soul, or God within. It cannot be denied its existence, but struggling with it beautifies it more and more, and makes more and more tolerable that which in its crude form is intolerable. Vanity may be likened to a magical plant. If one sees it growing in the garden as a thorny plant and cuts it down, it will grow in another place in the same garden as a fruit tree. And when one cuts it down again in another place in the same garden, it will spring up as a bush of fragrant flowers. It exists just the same, but in a more beautiful form, which gives happiness to those who touch it. The art of personality, therefore, does not teach the rooting out of the seed of vanity, which cannot be rooted out as long as man lives, but its crude outer garb may be destroyed in order that after dying several deaths, it may be manifested as the plant of desires. The first form of the ego is that which the body helps to form, and the next is that which is formed by the mind. This aspect of the ego lives for vanity, which causes a person to do good and also to do evil. Its desire is always the satisfaction of its pride, and when this increases in the end, it results in tyranny and cruelty. A person expects others to see him as he thinks he is, and often his selfishness is excessive, and it is impossible for others to admire him as much as he wants. One wishes to be admired for his clothes, his jewels, his possessions, his greatness and position, and when this desire increases, it makes a person blind, and he loses sight of right and justice. It is natural that the desire for things that gratify the vanity should have no end. It increases continually. The tendency to look at others, to view them with hatred and prejudice, to consider them inferior to oneself. All such tendencies come from this ego. There are even cases when people spend money in order to insult another, to make someone bow before him, to make him give way, to put him in a position of inferiority, to make him appear contemptible. The desire for the satisfaction of vanity reaches such a point that a person would give his life for the satisfaction of his vanity. Often someone shows generosity not for the sake of kindness, but to satisfy his vanity. The more vanity a person has, the less sympathy he has for others, for all his attention is given to his own satisfaction, and he is blind towards others. This ego, so to speak, restricts life because it limits a person. Coldness, pride, jealousy all come from this ego. There is nothing so displeasing to the surroundings as conceit in whatever form. And what is the use of an opinion that is pleasing to us and unpleasing to all our surroundings? In reality, a person's true satisfaction comes from the opinion that others have of him, not from his own opinion of himself. There is nothing more repellent than a thorny ego. The outward manner cannot hide an ego that is not soft, even if the manner is very humble. It shows itself suddenly, unconsciously in a word or an action that jars upon another. The training of this ego requires more care than the training of the other ego, for it is a more difficult and subtler matter to be aware of the desires of the mind and to weigh them than to be aware of and to weigh the desires of the body. No doubt vanity is natural to the ego, and the ego is natural to every human being. But there are desires of the mind that are necessary, and there are desires of the mind that are not necessary. The more one controls the ego, the more one allows the virtues and merits that are in one's heart to manifest. This ego gives a false idea of greatness, but its effacement results in true greatness. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe. Catch me in the next video. May you find lasting happiness. Bye.